Nothing grows in Florida. I hate Florida. I grew up in New York. I came down here, my grandfather had tomatoes the size of your head. I come down here, I plant a tomato, it's dead. I mean, how many times have you heard that, right? How many of you guys moved to the state of Florida? All right, the free state of Florida. Florida gets a bad rap, right? Because we have these assumptions of how things are supposed to be. And we take these assumptions on how things are supposed to be, and we fail. I am friends with somebody, and she said, I don't know if I can stay here any longer. I remember always going and picking apples with my family. Up in Connecticut, we had the most beautiful apple orchards. At the time of year, we would have apple cider. We would go on hay rides. We had all these apples. And I come down here and there's just, I can't grow tomatoes. I planted lettuce and something killed it. Right, you've heard all these things. You can't grow in the soil here. There's no soil here. It's just sand. Everything dies. So you have to do raised beds. You have to buy dirt. Right? We have these ideas like, I don't put anything in my yard. I got a horse trough and I filled it full of potting soil, Miracle-Gro potting soil, right? You see these like, how do we get around Florida? I remember talking to a master gardener and she said, oh, it's not that hard to grow tomatoes here. I said, oh, really? She says, oh yeah, it's easy. First you start them inside in January, and then you're gonna make sure they get enough light because they're gonna get really leggy, and then you grow them to a certain size, and then you're gonna have to cover them when it freezes. I'm like, okay. And I put a bunch of manure on them, and then I did this, and I give them fish emulsion, and you stake them, and you gotta make sure that they're the type that produce quickly, because if they take too long, it's gonna get too hot for them, and they're gonna deteriorate, it's gonna be bad. And then what I do is I go out there and I spray them with this, and I spray them with this, and I make sure that I do this, and then you gotta make sure you pick the hornworms off, and you've gotta start harvesting them. And sometimes you just have to pick them when they're green, because you know when it rains, they split, and they get molds and stuff. And I'm like, this is not easy. This is actually not easy. It's a pain in the neck. So our assumptions are, we've got all of these, we'll watch gardeners on YouTube, or go on Pinterest. Don't go on Pinterest. It'll just ruin you. It's like crack for women. Oh, we could do that. This guy put 50 horse troughs in his yard. Yeah, it's like $15,000 of horse troughs, you know? You go in and you see all these like gimmicky things, or you just need to do aquaponics, right? Because there's no soil, so let's just grow in gravel. Well, our problem is that our assumptions are actually wrong. If you look around Florida, you will see a lot of green. There's a lot of green everywhere. Look at all of our beautiful popcorn trees and kudzu. It's a great place to grow something. Some stuff likes to grow here. Now, Florida is really supposed to be forest. You'll notice if you try to take care of lawns, there's an entire industry in Florida that's probably billions of dollars, and it's just lawn care. You got those ChemLawn guys, they come by and they make your lawn look like a golf course, and you better not eat any dandelions if they pop up, because you'll probably grow a third eye. But they take so much effort to grow the grass. But this is not really a great place to grow grass. If you have a pasture, and you've got cows on it, and they're trampling it and manuring it, and you lime it, you can grow a good pasture. But generally, if you leave something alone here, it wants to turn into forest. If you see foreclosure houses, right? First you start to get these little blackberries in the yard, and then you get the sumacs. A little further south of here, you often start to get paper mulberries. You start to get these weedy things that show up in the yard, and they start to take it over really quickly. Or those smilax vines, the green briars that tear your ankles all up when you try to walk. They all start popping up all over the yard, and in a very short period of time, you have a forest again of whatever decided to volunteer there. It doesn't want to stay St. Augustine grass. And in order to have that perfect St. Augustine grass, you have to kind of act like a cow, right? What does a cow do? It cuts the grass and it manures it. So we go out there and we cut the grass and we throw turf fertilizer on it to manure it to try and keep it up. But if you ignore that grass for a period of time, it turns into a weedy mess of jungle. So we have high rainfall and poor soil. A lot of it is poor soil. Some of you guys may be lucky and you might get a little bit of sandy loam, or you might have some of that clay loam or something like that. There are areas that have that in patches. The state of Florida actually has a lot of different soil types, but generally what we're dealing with is the dreaded sugar sand, and often it's pineland sugar sand, which is acid, fast draining, and grows rattlesnakes better than it grows tomatoes. So if you were to look at the way Florida is designed to grow and what is actually adapted to Florida, you will have gardening success. But what you have to do is you have to change your mindset from, I wish I could grow what James Prigioni is growing in his backyard. I wish I could grow what John Kohler is growing, or what I read, in this book or that book or this book. But a lot of those books are coming from New England, California, Midwest. Somebody said, have you read Elliot Coleman, The Four-Season Gardener? I was like, yeah, the guy that has the snow over his greenhouses. I was like, yes, I've read his book. But his crops and everything else is not that applicable to my area. You can always glean interesting things because you could get, from the mind of an expert, you can always find something interesting or useful, a tool or an idea or a composting technique or something like that. But to find what really grows in your region, you should really figure out who is growing food in your region that is successful. So this is where your local nursery guy, your local plant forager, or the older gardener down your street is useful. But you'll also find that people that really like to garden as a hobby are not doing it to feed themselves so much as it's a hobby. And so they may be using the 7-dust and the tiller and the expensive amendments and all that sort of stuff to try and make it grow. Yes, you can grow cabbages, you can grow tomatoes, you can grow carrots, etc. But they're not that easy, and a lot of us don't have that kind of time. So what I figured out is really the easiest to grow here are perennial trees and shrubs and some perennial vegetables, but they should be adapted to the climate first. So if you plant what loves the state of Florida, you will have success, and it will take you very little work. So where do you find these magical species? You just check the invasive species list for the state. Anything that's edible on there, you're good. It's already been pre-approved for the climate. That's actually only half a joke, because there are some of the best crops for the state that are actually, they've kind of thrown them on the invasive species list because they're so easy to grow. I was talking with some new Filipino friends about the ube yam. The ube yam is a purple yam that is a very, 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 very popular in the Philippines, parts of Southeast Asia. It's a purple yam. But that species got put on the invasive species list because there are wild populations of the white-fleshed version of it that live in the woods here and there, and somebody said, oh, let's put that on the invasive species list. It grows so easily. I guess, I don't know. I don't write those lists. But if it grows in your yard without a lot of work, that's what you want to concentrate on. So what you do is you change your palate and you change your expectations a little bit to grow the stuff that likes to stay. So first of all, you're gonna start with a forest system. Now, I'm a big fan of annual gardens, and I have done a lot on annual gardens, but the food forest system is what we're gonna talk about today, because for the lowest amount of input, you get yields over time that grow. Your yields will grow. If you've ever seen an old pear tree around here, there are pear trees that get 40 or 50 foot tall and they drop baskets and baskets of pears. And those are those sand pear varieties. They grow in the sand. Some people say they taste like sand. That's not a very nice thing to say. But they're generally harder processing pear varieties. They're good for pear cider, they're good for pear sauce, which is just like applesauce. We make pear salsa out of them, pear butter, sliced pears, pear cobbler, pear pie, and if you get tired of them, you feed them to your pigs and then you eat bacon. You get too many, who cares, right? There's no real loss. But if you spent $35 on a pear tree, and get a couple of them. A lot of them will self-pollinate, but you get 2 of them, they pollinate each other, 5-6 years, it's like, oh, it's taking a long time, but eventually you start to get pears, and then you get more pears, and then you get more pears, and then your kids eat pears, and your grandkids eat pears, and whoever gets your house later might be eating pears still for a very long time. The initial investment is really in time and a little bit of money. But if you were to go and buy organically grown pears for $2 or $3 a piece, the first time the tree produces 12 pears, you've paid off the initial investment. In my mind, I would rather have fruit trees than most investments because, they'll tell you, with investments, you want investments that pay you over time, even when you're sleeping, like dividend type investments are just going to keep paying you, and fruit trees keep paying you for a long time. The cost of groceries is always going up. So if you have a tree that is also going up in production, and you start to learn to like it, use it, harvest it, utilize it, you can get thousands of dollars of organic fruit off of a tree. And that feels good. So if you plant the plants that like the area, you start with your food forest system. You start with trying to make a forest. Instead of just letting nature plant whatever random stuff it wants to plant, whatever birds drop things in your yard, whatever blows into your yard grows, you're going to deliberately plant a forest. A lot of us need shade. And it's kind of nice to walk through a shady forest that's got a lot of fruits, and you can plant your vegetables around, and you kind of work your way around the edges of the trees. I've discovered that a lot of our vegetables will do better, even if they say full sun. How many of you get a packet of seeds, and it says full sun? Do they know what Florida sun is like? Nothing here likes full sun. I don't like full sun here. I think I'll go suntan. You just walk outside. No, I don't think I will. Full sun here is really excessive. Most vegetables here really only need a few hours of sun, and generally morning sun is the best. I found better luck. I even grew watermelons in part shade, and they did great. One time I decided to plant a row of beans along the back of a house that we were renting. I'm like, well, we're going to be renting for a few months. I want to plant something. So I planted a row of beans. It never got any sun the entire day. It was only the reflected heat off the sandy backyard. The reflection of the sand was enough for me to grow green beans along the back wall with no direct sun the entire day. But the packet says full sun. So think about that too. In order to start a food forest, we'll get right into the system quickly. A food forest is a series of layers. If you look at a forest, Robert Hart was a forest gardener in England, and he really popularized the modern idea of food forests, at least in the West. If you go to the tropics, you will find food forest systems all over the place, but they don't call it that, they just call it gardening. Here it's taken a little while for us to think about it because much of European farming has been very high production and very annual based because it's people that are coming from colder climates where you need to get as much food as possible in a short period of time. And as much food as possible in a short period of time is annuals. To give you an example, if you planted a chestnut tree could start fruiting in 3 years. You'll get a few chestnuts. In 5 years, you'll get a few more. In 10 years, you might get 10 pounds of chestnuts per tree. And in about 15 years or so, you could be getting 25 pounds of chestnuts per tree. That's pretty good, because you're not really working for it. Once you got it in there, it's just dropping chestnuts. You go boil the chestnuts and you eat them, and it's very much like a grain. However, if you planted one pumpkin seed, you could get 50 to 100 pounds of pumpkins if it does well. And if you're one of those giant pumpkin growers, you could grow a Volkswagen-sized pumpkin that nobody would want to eat because it looks gross. But The annual production, really fast, fast, fast. But it's also like a sports car. If you don't feed it, care for it, like really push it, if it gets stunted, if it gets frozen, if the bugs bite the top of it off, it's over. And trees are a lot more forgiving. And they're a lot more forgiving if you don't really have time for all that, to go out there and make sure that you weed and feed and water and pick the bugs off and spray them, etc. So a food forest system is like your low-key, over time, is going to get more and more productive. And also, as we get older, hoeing the corn and digging the potatoes and all of this stuff is quite a bit of physical labor. Whereas taking care of fruit trees, you're picking them. You're knocking them off or whatever. You know, my grandparents had a beautiful mango tree in their backyard down in South Florida, and they got tons of mangoes all the time. My grandma had a key lime tree, tons of key limes. She always made key lime pie every Thanksgiving, every Christmas. And they didn't really have to work for that. But the annual gardens that they had planted or tried to plant when they were younger in the sand, they just totally gave up on it. But the trees just kept producing and producing and producing and producing. So what you're doing is you're trading off. You're saying, I'm going to plant something that's going to take more time and maybe even less production than I could get if I intensively planted and manured and took care of an area, get really fast food. But it's a long-term growing with the climate and allowing a forest to fill in that would just be a weedy forest anyways. You're just selecting the forest and saying, this is my backyard is going to be a forest, but it's going to be a forest of useful and edible species. So Robert Hart talks about this, the levels of a food forest. There's the canopy, that's the tall ones. Can I have like 3 tall people volunteer? I have 3 tall people. Okay, you in the white shirt, you're tall.
Is this tall?
Yeah, you're tall enough. Coming up. Okay, so you'll be canopy. So anybody else? Anybody else just want to look weird? Yeah. I'll be part of the canopy. What you in the white shirt? You come up here on the other side. That'll work. So if we're the canopy, this is your top trees. This might be like your hickories, your oaks, and in a food forest, pecans. We have any kids? Any kids want to come up and volunteer? I mean, we're putting kids on the spot. All right, we've got some Schuster kids back there. All right, come on. I know. So if we've got layers, like in my family, my oldest is taller than me. He's 6'4", and my youngest is 16 months, so he's way down here. Oh, thank you so much. You can be the ground cover. So you'll be the ground cover, and you guys will be the shrub layer. So if you're looking at a forest, you've got your tall top species, right? So in a wild forest, you might have some oaks or anything. Underneath, you might have some persimmons, rabbit eye blueberries, sparkleberries, sumacs. And then down when you get lower, especially at the edge of the forest, you get your blackberries, and you get some of your shorter blueberries, and you get these other useful species. So you're creating an interlocking kind of a family of plant species. And so you start with that top one and you go down to the layers, and then even beneath the ground you can have a root layer. Thank you guys, I think that's a pretty good. I see it. Thank you, Schusters. So if you were going to do this in your backyard, let's say you take your pecans and you plant your pecans at 60-foot spacing, right? That's orchard spacing, 60 or even 80 feet for pecans, really far apart. But now you got a ton of space in between them. And it's going to take 10 or 15 years maybe for those pecans to get that big. So you got a pecan, you stick in a pear, and another pear. And over here you might put in a persimmon. Over here you put in a loquat. Now you got a few more systems, right? And now around those, you put in some blueberries. You might put in a Cattleya guava. You might put in some mayhaws. You might plant goomy berries. Some of these species are probably not familiar to you guys. Simpson stoppers, you guys know that one? That's a native edible shrub. The fruit tastes kind of like a sweet and bitter grapefruit mix. Kind of an interesting shrub. And then you've got blackberry varieties. Now we've got those blackberries that just tear you up, that everybody's trying to get out of their pasture, right? Man, you gotta lime that pasture. You don't lime that pasture, those things are just gonna take it over. Right, those, oh man, I hate those things. Well, I love them. They grow all along the fence lines and everything. You get free food, but they are unpleasant. But there are all kinds of thornless blackberry varieties. The University of Arkansas has released a dozen or more thornless blackberries that grow really well here. Stick a few of those in. Then on the ground, you can put in sweet potatoes, right? You can grow pumpkins. Now you're talking about annual production and the perennial production. Sweet potatoes grow really well here. White potatoes, it depends. I've struggled with white potatoes for years. Some of the soils here, they do pretty well. Some of the varieties here do okay. But it tends to get really hot too fast. So you plant russets, they get about this big, and then that's it. I was talking to a potato farmer from Maine the other day, and he goes, our potatoes were this big. I'm like, yeah, not here. We got to go to the invasive species list for birds like that, you know? So you start to get these layers, and if you look at a forest, you'll see particularly along the edges of a forest is where your productivity lies. So the permaculture guys like Bill Mollison, Jeff Lawton, Toby Hemingway, these guys are always talking about edges. The edges of a system is where your highest productivity is. If you ever walk into the woods and they're dense, thick woods, you go underneath the trees and suddenly there is nothing under there except the occasional little fern or a little bit of this or a little bit of that. It gets so it's pretty clear inside, you can just walk around because the canopy has closed. If you look at that from above, satellite view, you just see this big mass of green canopy all interlocking. All those trees have gone, closed the space. Now you have a dark interior that is not that productive. But if you go to the edge of it, you'll be fighting through wild muscadines and smilax and blackberries and Carolina jessamine and sumacs and everything along the edge. If you look at where kudzu invades, it invades the edges where you've torn a road through and the kudzu has spread along the edge. But if you go deep into the woods, the kudzu's gone. It's shaded out, it's just gone. So what you want is kind of a half-open canopy that allows you an edge. And in the early years of a food forest, when you have a bunch of little fruit trees planted out, it feels like they're so far apart. People do these things like you plant your fruit trees right next to each other because it looks right. You know, you plant your fruit trees 4 feet apart, but you're not counting on the fact that that fruit tree might have a 20 feet across when it gets a little bigger. So then they grow into each other and they fight. You'll see that in the woods, and there's a time to do that. If you want to deliberately dwarf something, you can plant it next to something else. You'll see like a cabbage palm growing through the center of a live oak sometimes, and that's fine. But if you want higher productivity, you kind of space them out to begin with and give them some breathing room. But in the early days of a food forest, when it's all wide open like that, you plant your canopy trees, and you're like, I've got so much space. Well, just run your gardens in between, and then you get that fast annual production. And the annuals here, it's the same thing. If you plant northern varieties that are not that adapted to this area, most of the time they just suffer. Vine borers will eat the squashes. If you try to go summer squash, just about the time they start to look good, suddenly they'll just wilt, or the middle of it will turn white and they'll rot. You'll get wilts and you'll get borers and things like that. But if you grow something like the Seminole pumpkin, it is just wild, and it just runs all over the place. It makes a bunch of pumpkins. We had over 300 pounds of pumpkins grow out of our compost pile because we threw a Seminole pumpkin in there one year. I think we hit over 400 pounds by the time it was done because it made a whole round of them in the spring, and then it died back a bit when it got hot, and then they started to run again and continued to produce green. Some of them are still green all over the place. I said, if this thing if we had not gotten a frost, I think those pumpkins would have just run all the way into the spring. So you use that open space in between, and there's your ground cover layer. The layers of it over time are going to they'll start to shade each other out. So let's say you plant a mulberry tree. It's just a little bitty thing when you plant it, and then it might be 20 feet and really broad in 4 years. They can grow very quickly, and they're producing tons of fruit. But now you've maybe got some blueberries that you planted next to it that are getting too much shade. Well, in that case, you just bust your chainsaw out and you cut a limb off. Or you cut that tree back again and feed parts of it to the ground and let it grow back. A lot of us are very afraid to cut our trees because we think we're going to kill them. this is one of those, I might kill it. I might kill it, I might kill it. And we get really precious and we get really scared. It's like when you have a whole bunch of seedlings and you started them all in a row and you don't want to thin them. You just end up with a bunch of scrawny stick plants that are completely unhappy. But when you thin and you open up light and you cut here and there, it opens it back up again. It's like I'm not really worried about it. So if you propagate your own plants from seeds, cuttings, division, that sort of thing, you can plant a bunch of plants close together, figure out which ones are looking good after a couple of years, and then chainsaw the rest of them down and feed them to the survivors. Just put them all on a death march, and whichever ones look good, you keep them. I know it sounds terrible, but if you were to look at the way a forest works, how many acorns do you think an oak drops for how many babies it actually gets? Tens of thousands of acorns. The squirrels eat them, the squirrels plant them, but many of them just become scrawny little trees that are just waiting for some gap to open, and then many of them die. So if you were to plant abundantly, overplant, so you buy some of the trees that you really love, you take really good care of them, and you grow them up, but at the same time, you're gonna stick seeds in the ground, you're gonna stick cuttings in the ground, and just keep jamming stuff out there, and you're gonna find winners quickly. I have planted 2 figs about 12 feet apart and had one of them grow to over my head and the other one stayed this big. Why? Why do they do that? Like, just grow. What is wrong with you? So that one gets the axe. It's a loser. It's gone. You know, so, but if you started, let's say your neighbor's got a fig tree. They're easy to propagate from cuttings. You could stick 70 fig cuttings in about an hour. Get a couple of pots, put some potting soil in them, stick a bunch of fig cuttings in there when they're just waking up in the spring, or they have a few leaves on them. Cut most of the leaves off, stick the sticks in the ground. A lot of them are gonna root. You can take some of the ones that root, put them right in the ground, or you could pot them up, and then you could take those potted figs and stick them all over the place. But let's say you've done 70 figs. I don't want 70 figs. What would I do with 70 figs? I'm not like a fig cartel owner or something, right? I don't need that many figs. No, you don't. You give some of them away. You plant a lot of them. Some of them don't do well. Who cares? You didn't spend anything except an hour or 2 of time. Same thing with planting seeds. Do you know how long it takes a peach tree to produce from seed? Anybody? 7 years? 2 to 3. 2 to 3. They grow so stinking fat. Nursery owners don't want you to know this one weird trick. The University of Florida will say that peaches are subject to nematode damage, they're subject to this and that and the other thing. Well, this is true. So they have specific rootstocks like Nemagard that is nematode resistant that they graft improved varieties of peaches on. But if you were to go to a peach you pick in your area, go buy a bucket of peaches, take all those pits, I've done this, crack the pits open, take the little kernels out, just get your nutcracker. Sometimes it takes a hammer, but you have to make sure that you pull your blow a little bit or else you just crush that kernel to death. And then you're a murderer, because there's a baby peach in there, you sick people. Just like that, right? So it's cracked it open, you got that little kernel in there. It looks like a little almond. And an almond is actually very, very similar to a peach. It's just that it's grown for the pit, not for the fruit. You take that little thing out of there, you get a little bit of slightly moist potting soil. Crinkle those little pits into that bag of potting soil and stick it in your refrigerator. Peaches are designed to have a timer inside of the seed. When the ripe fruit falls to the ground, the seed lays on the ground, or hopefully it gets carried off by an animal a little further away from its mama tree. It lays on the ground, it gets buried by leaves in the fall, and then the cold sets in, and it starts the timer ticking. If you plant a peach pit directly, it often will not sprout. It's got a timer, it's cold activated. It goes through a period of cold. When it starts to warm up again, it puts a shoot up. So what you do is you mimic winter in your refrigerator, and you throw them in there, and you'll see in about 2 to 3 months little white shoots coming out of them. At that point, you just stick them in pots, put them someplace somewhat sheltered, and just let them shoot up when they feel like it's warm enough. And you can start that whole bucket of peaches, 40 or 50 peach trees, stick them in your yard. Some of them are going to be happy, some of them are not, some of them are going to succumb to nematodes. But we did this. We started about 50 peach trees about 10 years ago, and I gave some of them away. I sold some in my plant nursery. I planted some in my yard. I was able to go revisit about 12 of them afterwards when they fruited. Every single one of them had good fruit. Slight differences in bloom time, slight differences in size and color, but they were all good peaches. You didn't get like bitter, nasty ones. And we're talking, I had one of them actually bloom at 18 months of age. It put on a few blooms, and a few months later we had about 6 peaches on it, and the next year it was buckets of peaches. So now instead of spending $34 on a peach tree that's grafted on Nemagard that I have to take care of, I just go throw peach trees in the ground all over the place. Here's another trick. Let's say you started a bunch of them and you put a little sandbox in your yard, right? Get a little sandbox, get some play sand or something. You plant seeds in it. Let them grow for about a year. So you've got a bunch of little trees. They can be right next to each other. When they fall asleep in the winter, before they wake up in the spring, dig them up out of the ground. This is called bare root trees. This is the way nurseries ship a lot of stuff. When the tree is fully dormant and it's got a waxy coating on it and it has no leaves, and you go dig a hole in the ground and jam it in the hole, it wakes up there and it thinks it's always been there. Even if you've broken the roots off, I've had pieces with only a piece of root that long and that much top. And I'm like, ooh, I wonder if that'll live. Stick it in the ground, it wakes right up and it grows. Because the dormancy, it's got all the sap in it and it is ready to spring in the spring. So if you plant them when they're sticks, you could just stick them here and here and here and here and here. I stick them all over my grocery row gardens, all over my food forest, and they pop up and they just come to life. And now you have your own fruit trees, and then in a year or two, peaches are making peaches. Apples can take anywhere from 4 to 8 years from seed. There's not a lot of apple varieties that really like it here, but I'm working on breeding some. Pears can take 6 to 10 years, which is getting it's like a little long for me. Pomegranates, 2 to 3 years from seed. Go buy a pomegranate, it's got 200 seeds in it. If some of them don't turn out well, who cares? Because you didn't spend $30 on the tree. Now, if you want a specific variety, you want a specific fruit, you want an Elliott pecan, you want something like that, that's when you go and you say, I'm gonna go to a nursery and I'm gonna buy that. If there's a specific mulberry variety you want or something like that, you go and buy it from a nursery, but then you can start it from cuttings and you can just go. So it doesn't actually have to be this huge investment. There are a lot of people that think that planning out a food forest has to be an expensive thing that you have to have a designer for. You have to make sure, like, what about your energies? What about your light? What about your water flow? Make sure you put it on a graft. Make sure you don't put it over here. Make sure you do this, and make sure you do this, and make sure you have your nitrogen fixtures and your swales. And they get analysis paralysis. Analysis paralysis has probably killed more food forests than anything else. I'll tell you how easy it is to plant a food forest. You've got some potted trees. It doesn't matter if you started them yourself or if you went to a nursery or if you even buy bare root, right? You got your trees. I need a canopy. Well, this is not that close to my house. It probably won't destroy the drain field. I'll stick one here. And then I'll take a few paces and I'll drop another pot over here, take a few paces, drop another pot over there, and then just pace out from there. So my canopy, that's gonna be the big trees, I'll lay that out first. Those are like the poles of the tent. They're gonna be the biggest part of the system. So if I had a little tiny backyard, this wouldn't be pecans, for example. I'm not gonna put 60-foot tall trees necessarily in a little backyard and then we have nothing but shade. If I have more space and I can space wider, I go like that. So I don't want those giant trees. I go down to a lower level tree. So my canopy might be mulberries. If I have a townhouse with a tiny backyard, I could still plant a little food forest, but my canopy would be maybe cold hardier guava, Japanese persimmon trees, which get maybe 10 or 15 feet tops. I go smaller. Or I plant trees that could get to 60 feet, but I prune them a couple of times every year to make sure they stay shrub size. And after a while, they just give up and they stay that size. It's actually, like, if it says grows to 60 feet on the pot, don't worry about that. That's just where you're like, oh no, it's getting taller. Well, get a saw. Like, I can't do anything. I've just been watching it for 8 years. Get taller and taller. It's like, and then you get a guy with a chainsaw crew to take it. I got too big. Come on, just cut it. Just cut it. If you cut right before they wake up in the spring, you can cut a tree in half. You can cut it down to the stump often, and it will grow back. Many trees will simply grow right back from the stump, and they'll be small. If you prune them in the summer, in the middle of the summer, usually after they fruit, you will greatly decrease the vigor of a tree because it has a lot of leaves on it, a lot of nitrogen up at the top. It's got a lot of fresh growth. You chop it all off sometime end of June, beginning of July. It goes, oh no, I can't hardly grow anymore. And it'll grow a little bit of growth and harden it up and go to sleep for the winter. If you cut it in the spring, if you've ever done this, if you've ever sawed down an oak or something in your yard and then the next year it puts shoots up that are 12 feet, it will do that. It's the safest time to do a heavy pruning because the tree's sap is all down in the roots and it's asleep and it'll come back from it. If you heavily prune something in the middle of summer, you might kill it. So what you're doing in summer is you're cutting the tops of the branches and just lowering the size. But generally, if it's starting to bother you, just cut it back. And if you miss a little fruit on it that year, it's okay because you started 70, right? So overall, the system doesn't have to be a complicated, well laid out, planned out on graph paper. You spent $5,000 on plants and a consultant and another $5,000. I mean, I saw it. There was somebody that came and visited my food forest, and she decided she wanted to do her own food forest, but she had a lot of money and no husband. And so she hired somebody to take all the dirt out of her yard and replace it with compost and topsoil and design this entire system. And if you like to design, that's great. You could be an engineer type and design an incredible food forest, and you may get higher productivity than mine. But the main thing that's keeping people from doing it is they often look at it and they say, I have to be an expert. Well, how do oaks do it? How does sumacs do it? They just throw seeds all over the place, right? And then nature is naturally selecting. But we are stewards of nature. We can increase productivity. One of the things that happened as the colonists moved through North America was they didn't recognize that there were already food forest style management systems going on in North America. They thought this is an incredibly abundant continent with a lot of food, which it was, but they didn't recognize that a lot of those trees were being used to keep people fed. And they had the idea of northern style row agriculture, high production annuals. They're not thinking about living on breads made from chestnuts or drying crab apples or selecting around particular trees that are growing in the wild. I went through somebody's yard. Somebody hired me to do a consultation on their yard and tell me what they had growing and tell me how they could grow more food. And I went through the back and I said, look at that, that's a persimmon tree. And it had beautiful persimmons all over it. Wild American persimmon. Now there's a lot of wild persimmons in the woods around here all the time, but not all of them have fruit and not all of them have particularly good fruit. This one is beautiful, nice big orange, pretty good for a Native American tree that had not been improved. And so I said, just clear a little bit around that one. Take the weedy stuff around it, give it a little more breathing room, and that's it, it's already there. So what you do is you lay your stuff down and you plant things as the whim hits you. It could be 5 minutes in a day, 10 minutes in a day. You could be the weekend warrior and go out there for a couple of hours and plant a few new trees. You establish your trees in, you just plug things in around them. You knock little holes in the ground and you put in some pumpkin seeds and let them run as a ground cover. You go fork this area up and maybe throw some mulch down and plant some sweet potato slips in it. You just kind of garden as you feel like doing a little bit of gardening and stick new things in. And meanwhile, your original trees start to grow and get bigger, and over time, they produce. But if you spent 3 or 4 years planning it out, where's your fruit? You're just waiting on it. There was a woman that asked me about establishing a food forest some years ago when I was first planting my more serious North Florida one. I had one down in South Florida that I planted 13 years ago. The one in North Florida was like 12 years ago. And at the same time I was planting mine, she was planting hers. And she got all these trees in pots, and she put them in her yard, and she was mowing around them and trying to figure out where to put them. I came and visited her about 5 years later, and she still had potted trees, some of the same trees, but some of them had actually grown through their pots into the ground. They were like, we'll just be a food forest here, I guess. But she was like, I don't know if I'm gonna put a chicken coop over there. I don't know if I might want kids to play over here. And I don't know if that's gonna get too big, or maybe I might wanna put a road here. I'm like, this is just never gonna happen. Just plant in the ground, and if something gets in your way, chainsaw it down later. Just stick a bunch of stuff in the ground. And that's really it. You get started, right? The hardest part is getting started. So I'll tell you right now, if you have analysis paralysis, here's how you start your first bit of food forest, right? You got one tree that you like. My neighbor's got a couple of pecans. I'm gonna put an Elliott pecan in my yard. Pick your spot for your pecan, right? And now, a little ways from that, put in a pear. A little ways on the other side where it's gonna get some sunshine, put a little persimmon. Over here, put a little mulberry. Now just mulch that area. You put down some cardboard, chop the ground up if you want to. You can mulch the area in between and just start planting sweet potatoes, plant blueberries, plant blackberries. Here's a trick you can do with blackberries. If you go and buy one of those nice varieties of blackberries and it's making those long canes, take the end of the cane, just the whole shoot, dig a little hole and stick it about 6 inches down into the hole. It looks weird. You're just taking the new growing shoot, jamming it right down to the ground and bury it. By about 3 to 6 months later, it'll be putting a new shoot up from there. When it starts to die back and harden off, you can dig that up and plant it somewhere else. But you could take like 6 canes. I had one blackberry plant and I spread it over about 15 feet that way, 15 feet that way, and 15 feet that way, and then this side was my driveway, and it just kept spreading it by just bending the new canes over and burying them and starting new ones. And then if I decide it's too crowded, I can go dig half of them out, particularly in the spring before they're waking up, when they're all real sleepy, they've lost most of their leaves, they transplant really easy, and just get popping them out, right? So you've got your little island. If you think in terms of little bite-sized pieces, like I'm gonna plant a pear, and 3 blueberries underneath it, and then I'll just mulch the area. You can throw down cardboard on the ground, get some mulch, put a foot of mulch on the ground, just don't put it necessarily right up to the trunks of the trees. But this is gonna kill the grass beneath. You don't even have to dig the grass up at this point, or the weeds up, or just the sand up. Put it down there on the ground, and now you've got one little island. Now you just mow around it until you wanna put another island in. I'm gonna stick another pear tree, maybe 16 feet that way. I'm gonna stick one over there. Stick another pear tree in the ground. Stick another couple of blueberries, blackberries, Cattleya guava, something like that around the base of it. Now I've got 2 islands. I just mow in between them. You can see in my food forest design video how I have a series of little islands. And they don't all have mulch, they're not all beautiful, there's weeds. But I have an old battered secondhand zero-turn mower that kind of turns slightly to one side, you know, so you kind of wrestle with it a little bit. But it mows in between, so I've got pathways that are the width of that zero-turn, and there's these little islands, and I just go zipping around between all the little islands, and I mow the grass, and the grass gets sprayed up underneath the trees, and that rots down and feeds the trees. But it gives me walking space in between so it doesn't become a big weedy mess. I've even found, if you didn't even bother taking the grass out, and you just planted a few trees in a little circle, and then you mowed around it, it looks like you did it on purpose. I even found when I was starting one of my food forests, all I did was mow different pathways through the weeds. I let the grass and weeds grow about this tall, and then I cut these meandering, winding pathways. We always want to do really straight lines, and there's a place for straight lines, but if you do a meandering pathway, you could say, look at it, it's a pathway through a meadow. And it suddenly looks like it's done. If you mow the edge and you mow a few wandering pathways through the tall weeds, it's a pollinator sanctuary. It's not a code violation. It's a pollinator sanctuary, right? And I like to say, go walk barefoot, but don't, because the ants will get you. So you can just simply mow around it and leave a little patch there, and it looks like it's done. One of the main enemies of trees is grass. Grass and trees fight each other all the time. They have chemical warfare. They try to genocide each other. They try to establish borders. They make treaties, and then they break the treaties. It's terrible. But the grass competes really rapidly. It eats a lot of the nutrients that would normally go to the tree. So I found that trees that are mulched, or trees that, even if you, like they do in the citrus, where they just cut it down to bare dirt, I don't prefer doing that, but it still grows faster than if you have the grass up to the tree. I don't know if you guys have ever done this, but when I was first getting started in planting fruit trees, I stuck a couple of peach trees from the University of Florida. I was like, oh, I would love peaches. Planted a couple of peach trees out in my yard along the driveway, right in the grass. The grass grew up to the base of them, and they sat there. I'm like, are you gonna grow? Sitting there, it grows like 6 inches, and the next year it's like 6 inches. This is terrible. But the tree that was at the edge of my garden, and in my garden, grew to 2 or 3 times the size in the same period, because it was not competing with the grass, and it was also getting a little bit of care. And mulch is actually a lot of care. In Florida, if you mulch your fruit trees, it really keeps the ground from getting baking hot. There's some days when you can't even walk on the sand because it's so hot. Well, the roots are trying to grow up near the surface. A lot of the feeder roots that gather the moisture and gather nutrients, they're right along the surface. After we had those terrible winds, well, we always have terrible winds, but one of the previous times when we had terrible winds, you could see the trees knocked over, and you see this big pancake of dirt that comes up with it, and you realize how many of the roots are actually in the first 6 inches. It's like this great big pancake of dirt that's just a mat of roots from the tree. Well, those roots are right there near the surface, so you put the mulch on them. As the mulch rots down, it feeds the tree. So if you can go to, I think, Jay. Some of you guys are from Jay, right? Got any Jay representing here? Jay, they have this pile of mulch, and you can go help yourself to the mulch. It's a mixture of pine and oak and hickory and whatever they happen to shred when they're cleaning the roadsides. That rots down over time, and it feeds the trees. Ground up trees have all the ingredients that trees need to grow. So if you look at a forest floor, it's all kinds of rotten, fallen bits of bark and branches and everything else. It feeds the trees, and they grow very happily in it. The fungi, the worms, the beetles, even the termites. The termites are breaking that wood down, and they're turning it into soil. They're micro-manuring. So instead of thinking, you gotta go get cow pies or something, if you bring the organic matter, you've got tons and tons of little bug and worm droppings in there that are just packing the soil, and they dig down and they go up and they put all this nutrients around the base. So not only are you keeping the ground cool, you're actually slowly feeding the trees, not with a shock of triple 13, but like a slow, constant release of cool, moist, micro-manuring, tunneling little worms and everything around there. And so I found that the trees that were treated that way did much better. So if you really want to, if you've got a tree that you care about, not just we're going to put them on a death march through the yard because I planted 70, but if you got a tree that you care about, oh, I really want this ivory white mulberry that I ordered from such and such nursery, and it tastes like honey, and it looks beautiful. I want that tree to grow really well. Put it there, clear the grass around it out to, about your wingspan. Put mulch on it. If you have compost, throw some compost down. Throw your grass clippings around it. The grass clippings rot down too. Compost your enemies. They're the tree's enemies. Feed them to them. You're going to take an incursion into the grass and do that. And then also, just make sure you water it for a bit. Because sometimes what happens is we put a tree out in our yard, and because it's not wilting, and because it's not begging, and I'm going, Mommy, please, I'm thirsty. It just sits there like, this is my fate in life. And it won't do anything. But it won't grow. It may live. Trees are tough. But it may not really grow. But if you go out there and you water it, you just remember like 5 or 10 minutes now and again. A couple times a week, you just go out and you say hi to it. And you water it. That will make it take off much faster than if you don't. Particularly, we do get a lot of rainfall here. So a lot of times you can put trees in the ground and they'll just grow. Things like elderberries, if you put them in a low spot, it's always moist. It doesn't matter, you don't have to take care of it. I had a mulberry that I planted in an area that would catch water a little bit, and it just grew. I didn't do anything to take care of it. But I've also had some pickier trees, and I didn't water them, and they took forever to grow, because I stuck them out at the edge of my yard where I don't pay attention. I give them a little bit of love at the beginning, and they will reward you with fruit much faster. But again, it's little incremental bits. It's not like you have to be a full-time farmer. It's just, what can I handle? I can put in a little island of trees in about an hour of planting, maybe. Put 5 or 6 trees in there, bring them some water, run the hose out or whatever, water them all in nicely. I could spend another hour, rip up some cardboard or put it down, or clear all the weeds. Some people are afraid of cardboard, because it's got chemicals in it known to cause cancer in California. But since we're in Florida, it's not really a problem. You can lay that down on the ground, it becomes a natural weed block. Just take the little copper staples out of there so they don't get in your feet, Put that down there, and then you just throw mulch over it. And if you don't have mulch, throw your grass clippings over it. If you don't have grass clippings, rake up leaves and throw it over it. Just get something on there to pin that cardboard down. Water the area really, really well before you put the cardboard down, and then you'll trap the water in. Water the cardboard well, it stays all wet and soppy, and then put it on top. Now, all that grass that's beneath there is going to rot over the next few months. And now you have a little island. And now that little island, that could be done in a Saturday afternoon. That could be done on a day off. That could be done on Labor Day, right? So you've got a little bit of time, boom, boom, boom. Put in a few things. And then you mow around it. And he's like, I don't feel like I have time to do more. Well, okay. You've got a pear tree there, and the timer is ticking. And in a few years, because you spent a half an afternoon, you will have a bucket of pears in maybe 4 or 5 years. And then you'll have 2 buckets, and then you'll have 10 buckets. Then you'll be giving pears away, and you'll be canning pears, and then you'll have to get a pig. What you're doing is you're just planting a little thing, and you're just watching the abundance grow out of it. But a mulberry tree, you plant a mulberry tree that's this big, it'll be this big next year, and it'll bear fruit. You'll get a few handfuls of fruit. If you look at a quart of organic berries from the store, $5, $6, something like that, and you're like, I want to grow strawberries. Strawberries are a pain in the neck here. They're just a pain in the neck. Like, you just work too hard. A mulberry tree will give you, I had a 2-year-old mulberry tree that really was happy, the one that was near a wet spot. The second year, we got 6 gallons of mulberries off of a 2-year-old Illinois everbearing mulberry tree. Even though it said it was from Illinois, it moved to Florida to get away from the taxes, the crime, right? And it was happy, it thrived. It was right next to the villages, So that tree, 6 gallons. Okay, so let's divide that up into quart packages sold for $5 each. Anybody good at math? 6 times 4 times 5. There you go. Times 5. 120. $120 worth. I think I spent like $20-something for the tree. Organic berries. Right. Or you could just grow lettuces in a horse trough and fight with it. And I don't think there's anything wrong. I rarely will denigrate other gardening styles because I have done row gardens. I don't know how many of you guys are subscribed to my YouTube channel. I'm a garden writer who ended up on YouTube because people said, not everybody wants to read. So I went and I started doing YouTube, and then I kind of like it. So the different methods of gardening for different reasons. I've determined that a certain amount, I call like my normal viewer, I call her Audrey. She's got a couple of kids. She wants to make sure she has food. She's overstressed. And she's like, I don't have time for this. But she and her husband can work a little bit on the weekend and get some stuff done. I have some people that are plant geeks, right? The plant geeks. Let's call him Martin. Martin knows everything about every single plant and will name the Latin names. That's a small percentage, but they're the people that just love the research of plants and digging in varieties. They're not necessarily survival gardeners. They're not necessarily trying to feed a family. They're the subject matter expert type people that just are excited about plants. That's a smaller percentage. I've noticed that there's a lot more Audreys and there's a lot more Tims. Like the backyard gardener guy who's just like, dude, this is cool. Let's see if we can grow some more food. I got this empty spot. I'm just gonna throw some stuff in there. And his wife's like, I hope you didn't go shopping in a nursery again. Tim, you remember we have a mortgage. I'm gonna pay for that mortgage in persimmons. It's just future groceries. That's what it is, really. If you look at it, it's future groceries. But if you have a little bit of time, a food forest is a pretty good way to go. But I won't say that it's the most productive system. There are permaculture people that will say, it's like we should feed the world with food forests. I think in certain climates, a food forest is good. I think in our climate, it's pretty suited to a food forest. We can grow a lot of food here without a ton of work if we pick the right plants and we have a long-term ecosystem and it starts to get shady inside and it gets cooler. I noticed after 2 or 3 years, the first 2 or 3 years, the trees are struggling, it looks bad, it's weedy, and I'm like, I'm a failure. And then about year 3, everything starts to just get its roots underneath it, and then it starts to grow, and then it starts to shade a little more, and your frosts aren't so bad, and your heat isn't so bad, the trees are more established. For example, a satsuma tree. Everybody wants to grow satsumas. But we had snow. How many people lost satsumas this year? Anybody? Yeah. I went to, there's a little church north of Mobile, St. Bridget's. And I was talking to the priest at this church, and he said, well, a volunteer planted a row of citrus out back here for the congregation. He says, do you think they'll live? I'm like, no, they're dead. They're all frozen because they're little trees, and if a little tree takes damage, it's done. Like if it's not a cold hardy tree like a peach. But after 4 or 5 years, the tree gets about this big and it can shrug off what a little baby tree can't take. So your first couple of years, you're like, I don't know, it's working all right. I got a couple of figs, I got some mulberries, but then it starts to mesh. And then I've noticed I could start pushing in plants that are not necessarily from this zone. I was able to grow stuff from further south because there was a little more tree canopy. There's a little more capturing of the warm air that comes up overnight. There was a guy in Central Florida who was tucking his pineapples underneath his live oaks, and he was growing pineapples even though you can't grow pineapples out in the open because the frost destroys them. In that big canopy of one of these cathedral oaks, it stays warm enough overnight. And the trunk of the tree is basically a column of water, and it takes a lot of, it's reduction in energy to freeze through a trunk like that. So I started to find I could push things a little further. Things wouldn't freeze back so badly, and it starts to grow. And then it gets easier, and then it gets really fun. But if you wanted to grow a regular vegetable garden, that's good. If you only feel like you can grow in a horse trough, that's fine. You're probably not going to grow a survival garden there, but you'll get some food. And even just growing some food, however you decide to do it, is putting you ahead of the game. Because if you can grow some food, you can grow more food. And if you can grow more food, you can grow a lot of food. And so I think a food forest is a really nice system for an area that's not being particularly used a lot. When you get closer to your house, you might plant more intensive stuff. That's where you might put your salsa garden, your jalapenos, etc. On whatever side of the food forest is closer to you, where you're more likely to look at it and care for it, put the more tender stuff. Right outside of your back door is where you should put your herbs and your salad greens and your little delicate stuff, because you should be able to go out in your bathrobe and pick what you need to throw in your morning omelet. You shouldn't have to go walk 500 feet, because you won't. Nobody wants to do that. You'll just go and buy cilantro from Walmart or something. It just doesn't happen. If you're interested in more on Florida Food Forest, I have a book called Create Your Own Florida Food Forest. We have some of them at my booth. It has an in-depth list of trees for the canopy, for the sub-canopy, propagation tips. It's got over 150 species in it, a lot of illustrations. I had 50 volunteer artists for it from all over the place that did illustrations, all kinds of different plant illustrations. It's very heavily illustrated. And there's a lot of tips. And it's for North, Central, and South Florida, but it's noted on the cold hardiness of each one and how far I've managed to push them. Because the way I got good at gardening was I killed a lot of plants. Because what I did was I threw stuff at my backyard for years. And the stuff that lived on the limited time I had working a real job, and the stuff that thrived, I kept replanting. Until I figured out what grows here, and that's what I write about, and that's what I teach on. And if you want more in-depth, if you want my help directly on a food forest, that little handout has my private group. It costs less than the price of going out to eat once a month, but it supports me actually producing long videos and being able to answer questions directly, because I found that YouTube has just gotten it's too hard to follow what's going on in the comments and to answer when there's hundreds of comments every day, and I get a lot of emails too. So if you're interested and you want to just kind of jump into that, you can scan that and join us. And then I've put a bunch of video trainings on it that are more in-depth, including how to start your food forest for almost free by propagating your own stuff. But really, I don't care if you give me any money at all. I mean, I like it. I've got a lot of kids. But you can support a large family in the depressed economy of lower Alabama, just north of the Florida Panhandle. But I do want you guys growing food, because I think everything is a little shaky and our supply lines are very long, and the more people that can grow food, you're gonna be able to take care of yourself, you'll be able to take care of the people at your church, you'll be able to take care of your neighbors, and if you know how to do it already, and you know how to propagate, and you're not afraid, and you've lost your analysis paralysis, it becomes second nature to grow food, and it's so easy to expand once you've broken through that initial, I don't know what to do when everything dies, and then you're like, well, I know this works, and this worked well, and this worked well, and you've just done it. You just get dirty, and you make a bunch of mistakes, and none of these mistakes are failures, right? They're all learning opportunities. They're sanctifying. They're character building. I had a very wealthy guy tell me once, he said, you need to just fail faster. Don't get hung up on one thing. Just push it to the end and see if it's possible. And if it doesn't work, look for the next thing and push that to the end. Because usually what happens is somebody goes, well, I planted a tree 5 years ago and it died. And that's it. That's the end of their gardening career. They have a black thumb. They're just never going to do it. It's so silly. But that's what we do. And we get really precious about stuff too. It's like, I killed it. Well, so what? How many of those oak trees died? How many of those little precious acorns got eaten by squirrels? It happens. But you start to figure out what works. And so if you can grow any food, I would just say a fruit tree is one of the best investments you can make. Get a fruit tree, put it in the ground. There are good nurseries here and there. There's Derek in the back here has a good nursery. What's your nursery's name, Derek? Exotic Edibles. So Derek right there, he's got a nursery, Shuckleberry Farms. There is, if you go further over into the state, there's Scrubland Farms. We're not that far from some decent nurseries. Not everybody around here grows azaleas. It seems like it. But there are little nurseries, and there's a lot of backyard gardeners that you can trade seeds with, get cuttings from, etc. This is the sort of thing you can do on a shoestring. Even if you can borrow land, you can plant a fruit tree, and it is just, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer, especially with inflation. You're taking that money, and right now, and you're doing it here, and if you started it from a cutting, you're going to be making future groceries with nothing but a little bit of time. And a lot of us have more time than we have money.